Two of Cincinnati's young stars got national recognition this week, but was it enough? Are the Reds' core underrated, Nick? Let's discuss it. Welcome in to Chatterbox Reds. Hello, everybody. I'm Craig Sandlin, joined by my good friend, Nick Kirby. Nick, how are we doing on this chilly Thursday evening?
Doing good, doing good. Happy to talk a little bit of baseball. There's been just enough Red storylines every week to keep some content coming. So hopefully this at least gets us until January, and then we can just start digging into prospect rankings and stuff like that.
you thought the offseason would be a little bit slower for you, huh? It feels like you're doing a pod every week. So
It was Craig. It was like last October and into November, there was nothing. It was hardly anything. And I don't know, maybe I'm just searching harder this year. I don't know. But I mean, I am a full-time employee now. I wasn't last year. But yeah, it just feels like there's something every day with the Reds.
I think that's probably a good place to be in. But before we jump into recognition for the Reds, Nick, we want to give some recognition of our own to one of Chatterbox Sports' valuable partners, Deep South Commodities.
Yeah, as always, thanks to Deep South Commodities, DSC. They are a leader in renewable commodities for biofuel production, specializing in used cooking oil collection, aggregation, and sales. Visit www.deepsouthcommodities.com for more information. Thanks, as always, to our friends at DSC.
That's right. Nick, let's jump into it. Over the last couple of days, both Hunter Greene and Elly De La Cruz finished 8th in their respective postseason award voting, the Cy Young and the MVP, respectively. Let's start with Thursday's announcement, though, Nick. Elly De La Cruz finishes 8th in the NL MVP voting, finishes in 8th behind Chris Sale, Bryce Harper, William Contreras, Marcell Ozuna, Ketel Marte, Francisco Lindor, and unanimous MVP selection Shohei Ohtani. Where did you think Elly was going to rank amongst the MVP voting at the end of the year?
I probably thought he'd be in that 6th range. But there was just a lot of people that straight left him off their ballots. And when you get left off ballots, it kills you. I know Joey Votto back in 2017, there was one writer that just completely had him 5 spots below everyone else. And that was the reason he didn't win an MVP. So, I mean, ultimately, these things don't really matter all that much other than, us being fans. But, I feel like if you have a vote for an award like this, I kind of feel like you should maybe take it seriously because there's a lot of people that would love to be able to vote in something like this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the wide range of votes that Elly got this year, you mentioned it. Elly appeared on 21 of 30 ballots this year, was left off by 9 different writers. Meanwhile, he received 4 fourth-place votes. What was interesting, though, Cincinnati's representatives on the committee didn't have Elly necessarily as high. C. Trent Rosecrans of The Athletic had De La Cruz 8th, while Gordon Wittenmeyer of the Cincinnati Enquirer had him 9th. Gordo actually had Elly De La Cruz behind 1.0 B-War Luis Arraez. I know B-War is not necessarily the end-all, be-all when determining MVP votes, Nick, but aren't you supposed to get a little bit of favoritism from your home team writers? Maybe just a little bit?
Well, you would think so, especially when you get the opposite from the Reds' rivals for the most part. Both St. Louis writers left him off their ballot. One of the 2 Milwaukee writers left him off their ballot. One of the 2 Pittsburgh writers left him off the ballot. So you kind of would hope that the Cincinnati guys, man, they're supposed to be unbiased, but it's not even, I don't feel like being biased. I mean, the guy was 3rd in wins above replacement by Fangraphs, 5th by Baseball Reference. I mean, I kind of feel like that should be enough to at least have him in your top 5. So I don't really know what was going on there. C. Trent's, it's okay. I don't really have a massive grievance with C. Trent, Ohtani, Marte, Lindor. No problem with either of those 3. I mean, they're all, Ohtani and Lindor are more deserving than Elly. Marte, flip a coin. William Contreras is a catcher. You kind of maybe give a little extra with that. Harper and Merrill, I wouldn't have them above Elly, but they both had great seasons. They weren't that crazy far behind wins above replacement. Chris Sale was actually tied with Elly De La Cruz, so I can't be about that. And then That's everyone in front. So Trent's, I would like him at least 5th, but I don't really feel like he did anything malicious there. Now Gordon Whitmire, I don't know what the hell this guy was doing, man. I really don't get it. Adames being ahead of him is pretty weird in itself. I mean, Elly had 1.6 more F-WAR. If you're just looking at just pure hitting, Craig, Adames was a 119 WRC plus to Elly's 118. Like, we know Elly's going to be a little lower in that, but I mean, the guy had 26 more stolen bases. I just, like, wins above replacement is literally a stat for players like Elly De La Cruz, because you know, if you watch the games, that there's so much more impact than batting average, on base percentage, home runs, RBIs that a player has in the game, and wins above replacement calculate that. But the Arise, it's absolute insanity. I mean, Arise was 58th in the National League in wins above replacement. 58th, Craig. He was tied with Paul Goldschmidt, who had an atrocious year. The Cardinals didn't even pick up his option. That's how bad he was. He had the same amount of wins above replacement, Craig, as Andrew Abbott. I mean, that's like voting for Andrew Abbott for an MVP. Abbott had a nice year. Not no shade at Abbott, but Arise is a bad defensive player. Every single metric, minus 13 outs above average. He was even a better hitter. Like, Arise is this great hitter. Arise had a 109 WRC plus to Elly's 119. OPS was 70 points lower. Hit 4 home runs. He had 4 home runs. To Elly's 25. Elly had 71 more extra base hits. I'm sorry, no. Elly had 71 extra base hits to Arise's 39. And this is the one that really, I think, encapsulates it all. Elly had 41 more total bases than Luis Arise, the batting champ, the high average guy. Elly still had 41 more total bases. Just nuts. There's no reasonable explanation to have Luis Arise even on a ballot, much less ahead of Elly De La Cruz.
Certainly interesting decision, to say the least. It's worth mentioning, though, Nick, we've now mentioned both F-WAR and B-WAR. Can you talk a little bit about how those differ a little bit, and maybe specifically on the defensive side? I know that's a piece that a lot of Reds fans talk about, is Elly's defensive abilities.
Yeah, so most of the calculations for WAR are pretty similar, except for defense. But the ironic thing is, Craig, both of the calculations use a defensive metric that Elly's not favorable in. So Elly had the great outs above average. I think he was plus 15 for the year. The outs above average, which is the new gold standard across baseball. It isn't even used in the wins above replacement calculation. They're still using older defensive calculations. So Fangraphs uses ultimate zone rating, which had Elly ranked 16th out of 18th. So he was penalized 16th out of the 18 qualifying shortstops. Baseball Reference uses defensive runs saved, which had Elly minus 2 defensive runs saved, 15th out of the 18th qualifiers in baseball. So those stats did Elly no favors on defense. If you're thinking, well, they're just using those cute little calculations that outs above average that I saw with my eyeballs, he made a bunch of errors. The metrics were actually more with you. They were penalizing Elly on that. But the base running, that just it's incredibly valuable. And it's not like you're a guy who just steals a bunch of bases, but a guy who steals a bunch of bases and hits 25 home runs and does all these other things. That adds up to one of the top, I think, 3 players in the National League, at least one of the top 5.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 prevailing trends that I noticed in this year's voting, Nick, and I don't think these are new per se, but definitely interesting nonetheless. The first is just how difficult it is for pitchers to be recognized in the MVP race. Chris Sale, the only pitcher in the top 10 in vote getting. Zach Wheeler and Dylan Cease also received votes. But in addition to being a pitcher, the other clear hurdle for MVP candidates this year was very clearly being on a bad team. Matt Chapman is one that comes to mind. He was second in the NL in B-WAR at 7.1, but finished 11th in voting on an 80 and 82 Giants team. what does it say about Elly De La Cruz in the eyes of the national media that he was able to overcome a Reds 77-85 record to finish 8th in MVP voting this year?
Yeah, I've never understood the you have to be on a winner. I just think it's such a no one actually follows it, because if the Dodgers would have missed the playoffs this year, which we know was impossible, Ohtani still would have been the unanimous MVP. They would have broke their protocol for that. So it's like, well, we just give people a boost. It's baseball such a team game that I hate that mindset. I mean, if you want to maybe use it to break ties, like that's fine, I guess. But when one player is clearly better than the other, I don't know. I would view MVP as, if I had to pick which of these players for that season could I have, that's how I'd pick. If you're a GM and you could go back in time and say, I can pick these players, I think that's kind of how you would do it. And then you can certainly take away someone who didn't play most of the year. But, in terms of all the players that played the whole year, that's kind of how I would view it. Pitchers are weird. I don't know how I feel about pitchers, Craig. I don't know. I kind of like Chris Sale. Like, he was as valuable as Elly De La Cruz this year. So I don't really have an issue with him kind of getting up there. And just because it's rare that pitchers are usually quite a bit below the top position players. So I don't really have an issue with that. I know there's they have their own award, but when they actually are one of the most valuable players, I don't know if I have an issue with it, but I also don't feel like it has to be on there either.
Yeah, it's a little bit similar to the conversation we're having on the Bengals side right now, obviously, with Joe Burrow and the seasons he's having. If you take Joe Burrow off of the Bengals, I realize that their record isn't great as it is, but they may be a 0 or 1 win team at this point. If you take Joe Burrow off of that team, similar conversation, I think, here. If you take Elly off of this team, what are they? And I think we know that answer.
Yeah, could you imagine Santiago Espinal playing shortstop all year for the Reds? I mean, I love Santiago Espinal, but I don't know if this team wins 70 games. I mean, it would have been a miserable watch. I mean, I don't get it. Shout out to the writers, though. I do, I'm a positive guy. So Stephanie Apstein of Sports Illustrated, New York writer. David Lennon of Newsday, New York writer. Alex Stumpf, a Pirates writer, or not a Pirates, Pittsburgh writer for MLB.com, and Evan Webeck of San Jose Mercury News. They all had Elly fourth. They were the only ones. So shout out to them. The people who left Elly completely off the ballot, an Atlanta writer, a Milwaukee writer, a Phillies writer, Todd Zalecki, who had some beef with him earlier in the year when he tried to say that I was not reporting something accurate. That was accurate from the TBS broadcast about a rain wedding in Philadelphia. You may remember that. One of the other Pittsburgh writer had Elly completely off. So one had him fourth, one had him completely off. So Elly was clearly a polarizing player on these ballots. I mean, two guys who literally sat next to each other all year. One had him not in the top 10, one had him fourth. Both San Diego writers had Elly off, so go to hell, San Diego. And then both Cardinals writers, shockingly, had Elly De La Cruz off of their list. So shout out to St. Louis.
Well, maybe the Cincinnati writers can give them a little bit of payback next year when the voting comes back around. But Nick, before we turn subjects to Hunter Greene, we want to take a minute to tell you that if you are struggling, it's okay to share your feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. We also want to remind you that you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a place to get support for anything related to mental health. Whether it's an immediate crisis, simply wanting to find out how to connect with care, or anything in between, it's a 100% confidential, secure, and anonymous way to reach out for help when you don't know where else to turn. To connect, call or text 988 or visit mantherapy.org to get help. It's okay not to be okay. And yeah, Craig, I mean, this, holidays are obviously a really hard season for a lot of people. And we're really proud to partner with 988 and always have that as a resource because, I know a lot of times this time of year can be really hard for a lot of people. And just, always remember you're not alone.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, I want to turn our attention now to Hunter Greene. You may remember during our All-Star break special, Nick, that we all went around and we made bold predictions. And, at the time, nobody really thought it was crazy, but I don't think anybody thought it would really going to happen. I said at the time that I thought that Hunter Greene would finish top 5 in Cy Young voting. Well, he didn't quite get there, Nick, but he does finish 8th. Hunter actually finished with the highest B WAR of any pitcher in the NL at 6.3, though. Were you surprised either way in terms of Hunter finishing 8th in Cy Young Award voting this year?
Yeah, I think that's pretty close to fair. I know he had the really high B WAR. F WAR had him tied for 8th, also tied for 10th. There was three players there, so I thought that he would be close to the top 10. I wasn't 100% sure. He didn't qualify for the ERA title. He didn't have enough innings, so it's really hard to be upset, when the guy doesn't actually qualify for the ERA title. But it's really cool to see him getting votes, because if he didn't get hurt, I think he legitimately probably would have been a finalist. I really do believe that, because looking at F WAR, there's a pretty big gap between second and third, and I think that the Greene was certainly trending that way, and with the high B WAR, he would have just increased that lead even more. So, I don't have an issue with it, but it's cool to see him get some recognition nonetheless. I think back to that start in Seattle where he only went 4 innings, and how irate a portion of this fan base was at Hunter Greene and his lack of development. And then you fast forward, and the guy pitched so well that he didn't even qualify for the ERA title and still finishes top 10th in Cy Young. I think that's a pretty incredible testament to how good his season was.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned kind of the differences in voting, but it's interesting. The MVP voting, the voters vote for their top 10. In the Cy Young, they only vote for their top 5. So it's a lot more difficult actually to place, I think, in the Cy Young race than the MVP race. David Brandt of the Associated Press gave Hunter a 3rd place vote. Brittany Giroli of The Athletic gave him a 4th place vote, which yet again, Nick, means that neither Cincinnati representative, Mark Sheldon, or Charlie Goldsmith voted for Hunter Greene. Surprising at all?
I can't. He was 8th in Fangraphs wins above replacement and didn't qualify for the ERA title. So that's a really great pickup that you saw, that there was only 5 that you could vote for. If neither Cincinnati writer would have put him in the top 10, I probably would have had a little bit of beef with that. But top 5, I don't know if I would put even Hunter in the top 5. It'd be pretty hard for me to have him ahead of Cease, ahead of even a guy like Skeens. I feel like Skeens was probably a more valuable player. So that's your 5 right there with Wheeler, and Sale, and maybe a guy like Logan Webb. So I don't have an issue at all with that.
The award for Hunter brings a financial compensation with it as well, Nick, in the form of an extra $500,000 in each of the last 2 years of Greene's contract. And that's a contract now that looks like it's quite the bargain for the Reds. They only paid Hunter Greene $3 million in base salary this year. This was a contract that I know many fans were thought was a little premature, I guess, when the Reds made the signing. How are you viewing the Hunter Greene contract now as you look at it?
Yeah, it's an absolute steal for the Reds. They didn't get a ton of years, so it was, this is the kind of gamble that the Reds clearly did right on. And, at the time, it was Hunter Greene and Nick Lodolo at the time of those contracts were neck and neck. Some would have Lodolo higher on the pecking order, and clearly at this point, they're not even in the same conversation, more so because of Lodolo's health than anything. But even when Lodolo was healthy, he was nowhere near where Hunter Greene was this last year. So, it looks like the Reds gambled right. Really looks like the Reds probably gambled right on all their pitchers. Probably shouldn't have extended Lodolo. Because clearly I think you get him for less than whatever he was at that point. Remember, Graham Ashcraft wasn't probably that far away from even Hunter Greene. Clearly, that was the right decision not to extend him. Not saying those guys can't still be very valuable pitchers, but whatever they would have been looking for at that point, clearly they would not have been able to get that or anywhere close to that now.
Yeah. One last question for you, Nick, before we wrap this one up. An interesting conversation on Off the Bench this morning that I'm sure you saw. So I'll ask you, Nick, which one happens first? Elly De La Cruz wins an MVP or Hunter Greene wins a Cy Young?
Probably Hunter Greene. I mean, I think Hunter Greene's more likely because of Ohtani. Caveat is Ohtani could get hurt. Like, I don't like to put that out there, but if Ohtani gets hurt, I think Elly, if I was an odds maker, I'd probably have Elly De La Cruz maybe as second next year. I don't think I'm being crazy either. I mean, Lindor, he's getting older. He was the second best. Who else is really on an upward trajectory? So, Elly's already probably penciled into second. Hunter Greene's not going to be penciled into second. There's a lot of things that have to go right to win a Cy Young. And we see with pitchers, it's a lot of up and downs. I'm not talking like, Hunter Greene's going to be a bad pitcher next year, but there's not a lot of pitchers that are Cy Young pitcher year after year after year after year. Whereas like Elly's going to constantly be ranked as one of the highest in wins above replacement, probably every single year. Even if Elly regresses a little bit offensively, I think his defense is going to improve enough to probably make up for whatever he loses if he has a little bit of a down year offensively. So I think it's Greene, but again, if Ohtani gets hurt one year, then that very well could easily be Elly's year.
All valid points. Well, that'll do it for tonight's episode of Chatterbox Reds. Be sure to stay tuned in to Chatterbox Sports all year long for the latest in Cincinnati sports talk. Chatterbox Reds will be with you all off season whenever news breaks, and Nick will be live with special guests throughout the off season as well. Off the Bench airs Monday through Friday at 10 a to 12 p. Chatterbox Bengals Tuesdays at 6 p.m., Thursdays at 7 p.m., and live during and after every game. Chatterbox Bearcats with you after every Bearcats football and men's basketball game as well. All of this and more can be found on the Chatterbox Sports YouTube page and wherever you get your podcasts. For Nicholas Kirby, I'm Craig Sandlin. This has been Chatterbox Reds. Thanks for tuning in.